to all municipal pension plans in the province, or it may not. We don't have any information before us to prove that one way or another. But if HRM is the issue here, why isn't this bill dealing with HRM? As I said the other day, Mr. Speaker, if this House can consider and pass a bill conveying a 30-foot strip of land in Tatamagouche, then it can deal with exemptions for this particular plan or that particular plan, provided they meet conditions laid down by this legislature. And it appears that by any reasonable test, Mr. Speaker, HRM has met the test. So why doesn't this bill deal only with HRM? That is the essential question that I would suggest that each member of this House should be asking himself or herself. If it's about HRM, why are we being asked to strip away benefits from all pension plans?
Order, please. We've reached the moment of interruption. Recognize the honourable member for Halifax Needham. The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say a few words tonight in late debate regarding the chronic pain situation as we at the Workers' Compensation Board. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's over a year since the federal court had struck down the offending provisions in the old Bill 90, Mr. Speaker, in particular Section 10 and Bill 90 that discriminated against workers with disabilities in this province. But, Mr. Speaker, what did this government do? Did this government run to the aid of these affected workers? No, Mr. Speaker. What it's done, it's turned its back on those workers. It's literally put aside, turned a blind eye to a Supreme Court decision. Now, if you listen to the leadership down at WCB, they'll say, well, we fixed the problem. There's no problem anymore. It's all done with. We've stopped using the offending clauses. Well, Mr. Speaker, they may have done that, but there's literally hundreds of Nova Scotians that are suffering because of this government's inaction. Now, Mr. Speaker, this time last year, this government, this very minister, brought forward Bill 20, and where it's at, it's anybody's guess. I don't know if the cleaner got it or whatever, but it's certainly not coming forward. It's stuck over in law amendments, and this minister does not care enough about injured workers to bring it forward.
Order, please. I would suggest to make a comment like that as unparliamentary. That's the member Cape Breton Centre to withdraw that, please.
I'll withdraw. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. Now, member for Cape Breton Centre has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, we have real problems with injured workers in this province. And it's no more highlighted, Mr. Speaker, than by the decision of the federal court. And this is one of the things, if the minister isn't going to engage in this debate, this is one of the questions that minister has to answer. Why have you taken over a year and have ignored a federal court order? Why have you and your department either have done that on your own or have allowed the folks down at WCB to ignore that? Because, Mr. Speaker, for the board to say that we've satisfied the federal judgment by not carrying the offending pieces of legislation forward and not putting the burden on those people, we're doing it a different way, is not accurate. It's not accurate because, Mr. Speaker, there was whole groups of people excluded by way of benefits by way of Bill 90. Bill 90 took a group of workers and said, okay, if you're not filed, if you don't have an appeal in the appeal system by this date, you're ineligible for chronic pain. And what we're going to give you is we're going to give you some work hardening, we're going to give you 4 weeks and send you back to work. Now, this group out here has been sitting now with a resolve by the federal court, but with a government with no resolve. The government will not go in and act and do what these people have been told to do. Mr. Speaker, this is not the first group to come and say the way you treat chronic pain sufferers is bad and it's wrong. No, Mr. Speaker. a committee that traveled the length and breadth of this province, the Dorsey Committee, the Dorsey Report, said the same thing. Said what you are doing with people with chronic pain is not right. Fix it. That was 2 years ago. This government still hasn't fixed it. So, Mr. Speaker, why do we have to, day after day, be allowed, and this is not my words, Mr. Speaker, but the words of the federal government, at the federal court, be discriminated against? There's large pockets of this province being discriminated against, and I don't know what the minister's rationale is around that, Mr. Speaker. Now, there were certain groups that said, and primarily it came from the board again, that look, if we give you what you want on chronic pain, rates are going to go up. Well, you know, here it is. You know, you're blaming the injured worker again. But you know what? There's been no resolve to chronic pain. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? Rates are going up. Rates are going up down on South Street. And then when I asked the minister last week, well, okay, rates are going up, Minister. How come a large segment of employers in this province, namely call centers, a large group of those are exempt? And the minister shrugged his shoulders and says, I'll get that information for you. Well, it's a week later, Minister, and I still don't have it. This is, you know, this is what's in essence, what is wrong with the system. Yet we keep going on, not even putting a Band-Aid on it, Mr. Speaker. It's a bad piece of duct tape we're putting over this. It's not even a Band-Aid. Yet the minister will bury his head in the sand and say it doesn't exist. We have governance problems down there, which have not been substantively dealt with. The minister stands on the sidelines again. Minister, what's it going to take? It's a federal court order to clean up that place. But Minister, you ignore it. You must be worried about that. You come from an industrial background. You must understand that, what these people are going through to try to look after their families. You also must understand that, you know, that here we have WCB's own one and only paper they have ever done on chronic pain. And what was the one and only version of chronic pain? What did that paper tell them? It was basically a very sports-like attitude about this, was tell the worker to jump over the boards and skate it off. You know, Mr. Speaker, there's injured workers that are 55, 60 years old, quite honestly, aren't like the young hockey players that were in the NHL that could jump over the boards and skate it off. Mr. Speaker, these are people that have faced the rigors of the heavy industrial work life of this province for many years to come. And it's an insult for the board to say, get out there and skate it off. But with that said, Mr. Speaker, the board in their own language says, you got a window period of about 4 to 6 weeks to get that person off chronic pain, or you lose them for a lifetime. So what's going to happen when this government, the light finally goes off and says, you know, we're going to stop listening to these people down on South Street, and we're going to come up and we're going to be on the sides of the injured workers, and we're going to come and we're going to do a piece of legislation. So what are they going to do? Because we've got so many people out there now that are suffering from chronic pain that cannot be taken back in because if they're in action. Because if, again, like I said, if you look at the 4 to 6 week area they give them, they're passing it. They're more than 45 weeks past it now because of your indecision on the court decision last year, Mr. Speaker. So what we have are these people suffering. So I think tonight, Mr. Speaker, the reason we bring this forward is through you to get the minister to answer some of those questions. I hope he will stand up and say that we do have a model for chronic pain that will work. One that is reflective of the people involved, all the stakeholders, not just the board. A real one that describes what those people, the users of the system, and the people that pay the benefits in that system and the premiums in that system, what they said, not the executive council around a board table on South Street said, Mr. Speaker, but from injured workers and from the owners of businesses in this province that pays in. They're the ones that have to be answered. What board is coming back is not reflective of what all of those hearings were said, and the minister should know that. The minister should know that it's the employers and the injured workers and the unions and the other various employers groups that says, we've got to make this thing work. For too long, we've been suffering with this thing. We've had at least 4 or 5 major changes in that act, Mr. Speaker, that have to be combined and synthesized in a workable way that gets people so they're not injured, and when you're injured, get back to work in a timely manner. Not what's going down there is making chronic pain sufferers worse instead of better, Mr. Speaker. So I'm asking the minister tonight, through you, Mr. Speaker, that these are things that have to be done sooner than later, and bring Bill 20 back, and let's fight it out here on the floor. Don't leave it gathering dust in some other chamber, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few things I'd like to point out with regards to this issue. And I guess one would be that over the past year, government and the Workers' Compensation Board have been working very hard to develop a system to address chronic pain claims for workers' compensation. And this is no small task, Mr. Speaker. It certainly has required a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of input, and a lot of discussion with all those people involved. We've been working to establish a system that's both fair and sustainable, and of course they need to go together in order for this to work. Last fall, the Supreme Court of Canada found Nova Scotia's legislation and regulations to be unconstitutional. They asked for fairness, equal access, and individual assessments. And we've since implemented a system that is fair. If you have chronic pain as a result of workplace injury, you may be eligible for benefits. The benefits are based on the best, most widely used scientific guide available, and that's the American Medical Association, or referred to as the AMA Guides 5th edition. And Mr. Speaker, we took a lot of time looking at what options were available, and this was the least restrictive. This was the best option available to ensure that injured workers were assessed fairly. It ensures that injured workers are assessed and have access to services as quickly as possible. It ensures the greatest number of injured workers will be eligible for benefits. And that was our goal, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the maximum number of injured workers with chronic pain would be eligible for those benefits. And the system also provides for equal access. Through this system, chronic pain is now recognized as a compensable injury, just like any other workplace injury. And no matter what your original injury, you now have the opportunity to receive a chronic pain benefit. This system provides for individual assessments. That's a very important portion of this, Mr. Speaker. We want to make sure that individuals are assessed to determine what their levels of disabilities are. If you suffer from chronic pain as a result of a workplace injury and are eligible, you'll receive an individual assessment by a board to determine the level of benefits based on the pain-related impairment. Being assessed with a pain-related impairment, or a PRI, is significant for an injured worker. It not only makes them eligible for financial compensation, but it also opens up access to all of the services available through the workers' compensation system, including such things as additional medical aid, like coverage for prescription drugs for pain or vocational rehabilitation. These chronic pain regulations ensure equitable application of the rules. I'm pleased to say that the Workers' Compensation Board has put a team in place to address chronic pain claims and will begin to render decisions later this month. Gail Boone is the head of this new transitional services team. Many of the team are also new to the Workers' Compensation Board. They have come with significant experience from the health and social sciences fields. In addition, Mr. Speaker, Dr. John Akers from the Sydney area is the full-time medical advisor for the team. He's a well-respected specialist and will bring a fresh, new perspective to the resolution of chronic pain claims. Needless to say, the Transitional Services team has a big task in the months ahead, reviewing approximately 4,000 claims. And I understand the transition team has already been meeting with injured worker groups to discuss the process and answer questions. And I'm pleased to hear that recent meetings in Cape Breton went well from what was reported back to me. It's been estimated that it will cost about $220 million to provide benefits to injured workers with chronic pain for the 20-year period since 1985, and an additional $11 million each year into the pockets of Nova Scotia's injured workers. This is added to the more than $153 million in benefits paid out in 2003 to support injured workers and their families. And Mr. Speaker, I think it would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to say prevention is the answer in the future, and we have to work extremely hard to ensure that we have fewer injured workers who will need benefits. This is a significant program that we have, Mr. Speaker, governed by the employers and the industry of the province. And as such, I'm sure they must have some questions about how this new benefit will impact the system financially. Obviously, the Workers' Compensation Board and its board of directors are responsible for setting rates, and they will be reasonable and responsible in their approach. Having a new system to address chronic pain claims is an important decision for injured workers. Injured workers, together with employers and labor, make up the principal stakeholder groups for the Workers' Compensation Board. And this system is for them, and it will be implemented with their participation. Over the past year, the Workers' Compensation Board has shown its commitment to building a fully consultative approach to planning. This initiative will be no exception. Stakeholders must take greater ownership, have better information, and have more input into the direction of the workers' compensation system. Enhancing board memberships will help to ensure that all stakeholders play a greater role in government's planned changes to the system. And Mr. Speaker, I think we are all here today appreciating that changes are necessary as we move forward, and we have looked at those, and we are intending to implement changes that will be beneficial to all those stakeholders involved in the system. And as you may recall, when government first responded to the review of the workers' compensation system, we said that our role in the system is primarily to set the framework for governance. The governance of the workers' compensation system must be on solid footing as the system evolves and improvements continue. I asked the Deputy Minister and the Chair of the Workers' Compensation Board to look at governance issues to monitor, to ensure announced changes are working well, and inform me if they feel future changes are required. And Mr. Speaker, there's been a lot of work that has taken place with the Chair of the Workers' Compensation Board and the Deputy Minister. They had a relatively short timeline. They've looked at governance issues across Canada and in other jurisdictions, and they are working hard and have worked hard to come up with a paper, a discussion paper, to look at what options are available out there and what will make the Workers' Compensation Board more responsive in the future. In recent weeks, the discussion paper was released to stakeholders regarding the governance issue, and the governance issue has been one that has come up over and over and over again since I've been involved with this file. It is something that we have reviewed. It's something that needs to be reviewed on a regular basis with any kind of a structure similar to the Workers' Compensation Board. They've outlined some options, and they will be discussing them with the stakeholders in the coming weeks. And that's one point, again, that is extremely important, Mr. Speaker, that the stakeholders have input into this process, and the stakeholders are well represented on the Board of Directors of the Workers' Compensation Board. When these discussions have completed, I certainly look forward to the results that will come up. There have been ongoing discussions with these individual groups as the process has moved forward. This is a very large undertaking. This is a very large process and a very important process, and we want to make sure that it's done properly. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the injured workers, the employers, and the labor representatives who have participated in the many meetings and discussions that have led to the new chronic pain benefit. I know it wasn't easy, Mr. Speaker. I know there were a lot of emotion involved. I know there was a lot of spirit involved, and I know there were a lot of people who had the best interests of injured workers in mind. This is a fair approach that will ensure that all workers since 1985 who develop chronic pain as a result of their workplace injury receive equal access to the compensation system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is indeed a very delicate topic. It's a topic that many people have lived with in their homes and lost their homes over, and families broke up, and all kinds of very serious issues for people that have been diagnosed with chronic pain. Chronic pain is very difficult to identify, and it has a very negative long-term effect on many Nova Scotians. I'm glad to see finally that the government has come up with their new regulations to move this forward and hopefully give some of the people in the province an opportunity to move their cases forward and hopefully come up with the compensation, the real compensation that will help them get on with their lives. Unfortunately, the things that have happened in the past are probably not going to be able to be reinstated. People have lost their homes, marriages have broken up, and other serious things that have happened to families. It disturbs me, though. The government brought this bill in not long ago, and indicate they had this bringing this legislation forward so they could move forward on the Supreme Court ruling. All of a sudden, when we started really debating the bill, the government realized they were in trouble with this bill. Well, they wanted universal coverage for everybody, and would have hurt the small businesses and the really small mom-and-pop operations if they had to pay workers' compensation immediately. Well, in the meantime, the big banks would walk away again scot-free like they have at the present time, instead of them being assessed and going through the system, especially when they have a group of pretty low-risk cases that could come forward from the banks as compared to some of the heavy industries we have in the province. You know, so they brought regulations in to do this. So they didn't really want the reforms in the Workers' Compensation Act that really probably should be put in place, truly, so they can go through and a worker that is injured knows they will get the kind of treatment that they should be getting from the Workers' Compensation Board, and truly be an insurance program for those workers. On the other hand, they brought the regulations in. What's this going to do to the employers and the economy in the province? We realize it's over $200 million they're going to have to come up with. That's an estimate, probably more of a guesstimate than an estimate, on how they're going to fund this unfunded liability that's been created by the Supreme Court ruling. And the $11 million a year that they also have to come up with after that, as this proceeds and goes forward. 4,000 cases could be substantially more than $200 million, and it could be substantially more every year than $11 million. And if that's the case, and if it moves forward, and I'm not saying at any time that the workers don't deserve a really good benefit so they can look after their families. I mean, that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that it has a cost to the economy. It has a cost to the economy that workers are injured. And workers have to be compensated for those injuries. And they also have to be cognizant of the point that the money has to come from somewhere. So if you take it from the existing industries and you grow their cost of doing business, all of a sudden they become not competitive anymore in the global workplace and the global market that our industries have to work in, and especially if they're displacing imports or if they're in the process of coming up with new products they would like to export, or indeed just doing a service in the community that's so badly needed. And every time we add a small tax, whether it be through the Workers' Compensation Board or through property taxes or through income taxes, which we've seen this government do here not long ago, it costs the economy, and the economy slows just a little tiny bit. And it's a long time before you see these things accumulate to the point that it creates a crisis. And by that time, it's too late to fix it. So you really have to look at these things. I know many people. I used to be associated with the NACPAC, the North American Chronic Pain Association of North America, that really worked with chronic pain, worked with Dr. Clark at the pain clinic at the QE2. And this is a serious illness, and it's one that doesn't go away. When someone typically has a back problem, has chronic pain as a result from the back problem or other problems, then this problem is with them for their lives. And it may mean that they can get up and function normally for a day. It may mean they can do that for an hour, maybe once a month, maybe once a year. And it's no way to really have to live. And then if you had the real serious problem of whether your drugs are going to be paid for, or there's some way you're going to be able to pay for those, or you're going to get the therapy you need that maybe is outside the MSI system, then you got a really big problem, because then it also, you mentally get down and your pain gets worse. That's already a proven fact with chronic pain. So it's difficult to look at this and not understand why the government didn't bring the bill forward to the legislature for full debate. Really should have been brought here for full debate, because the long term of this is it's an easy way for the government to get out of this and say, okay, we'll make regulations, we'll fix it that way, and we'll worry about it down the road. Well, probably these guys won't be around after the next election, so they don't worry about it anyway. So what's going on is whoever the next government is, they're going to have to fight and straighten this situation out, and by the time they get to that point, the situation is going to be worse. So as it progresses, it has a difficult time catching up with it. So therefore, it's important that this is addressed and addressed properly. And I don't think the regulations, at the end of the day, are going to solve the problem. They're a short-term, quick fix to get the government out of the legislature with this bill that definitely wouldn't be passed here in the form they brought us forward. And I think it's time that the whole thing was brought to the forefront. People could sit down and discuss it in detail. And with that, I'll turn the rest of my time over to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm quite pleased that the honourable member has introduced this resolution, because it gives an opportunity for our caucus to clarify some misapprehensions about the bill that was approved back in 1998-99. Number one, Mr. Speaker, if the bill was so bad, why is it that we've adopted another chronic pain policy without another act of the legislature being proclaimed? So clearly it had nothing to do with the act. It was the policies of the board, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. All member for Cole-Harbour-Eastern Passage on a point of order.
I'm not sure, Mr. Speaker, what this specifically has to do with the resolution, but I would hope the member, if he's going to intervene, even for a brief couple of minutes, would ensure that the facts are pretty clear, that Bill number 90, we told him from the first day we spoke in this House, I remember sitting almost in this very spot, saying that that bill was unconstitutional, it will be defeated by the Supreme Court of Canada, and when it's defeated, we will be back here debating it again. We had problems with Bill 90, we were right, and I wish that member would actually understand that after 5 years.
Member Cape Breton West has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, they can say what they want, but the reality is it was a policy of the board, and that's what the Supreme Court of Canada took issue with. Because otherwise, why would we have another policy without another piece of legislation? So obviously, it's not an issue with the legislation. This group, Mr. Speaker, are the same ones that voted against the workers, and especially the injured workers, when this bill was introduced. And I will table evidence to show that, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please. The all member Cole-Harbour-Eastern Passage on the point of order.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. We voted against Bill number 90. We voted against 10B, which was a section that was passed in Bill number 90. And 10B, in a 9-0 decision, almost unheard of in the Supreme Court of Canada, was knocked down by the Supreme Court of Canada. That's what this government, when they were a government, decided to pass.
Thank you. It's not a point of order. It's disagreeing with the facts between two members. The member Cape Breton West.
Absolutely, Mr.
1 minute
Speaker.
left.
Mr. Speaker, when non-Nova Scotia firms had a 6-month holiday from paying workers' compensation premiums in the province of Nova Scotia, and I wanted to put Nova Scotia firms, Nova Scotia workers on an even playing field by bringing them down to a 5-day provision, what did the NDP say? No, let's give the non-Nova Scotia firms another 6-month holiday. But we got it approved with the support of the Conservatives. We generated an extra $14 million for the injured workers in the province of Nova Scotia, no thanks to the NDP, who voted against the injured workers of the province. Mr. Speaker, that is public record, and I will table the evidence, Mr. Speaker. They did not support the injured workers when the opportunity came. They're looking for more money for injured workers, but yet, when the opportunity came, they voted against them. And now they're here crying wolf. Mr. Speaker, they can't have it both ways. That is nothing short of double talk.
Order, please. Time allotted for a late debate has expired. We'll now revert back to second reading of Bill number 129. The member Cape Breton Centre.
I'll wait for the mic. Okay, that's good.
The member Cape Breton Centre.
I was just waiting for the mic, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to say a few words about this bill, and what I find is interesting when we talk about this bill. What some people will have you believe that really. The only great impact this bill will have is on the municipalities. That's the only area that's going to, and so go forward and sign off on it. And if you don't support this bill, if you decide not to support this bill, then you're for raising taxes and putting extra financial burdens on municipalities. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's, just not so. That this bill was part, and I don't want to go too far down this road again, Mr. Speaker, but it was part of an omnibus bill, the financial measures bill back in the spring, that the government at that time wouldn't stand by. It said, no, we'll withdraw. We never meant it to be there. But lo and behold, we're here today debating this very bill, Mr. Speaker. And before we get too far into the substance of the bill, I think, we've got to realize, the importance of everybody's retirement savings funds are, whatever they are. Mr. Speaker, we've got, just down over the road here today, a tremendous court battle going on over excess revenues in a fund that's winding down. And that fund, Mr. Speaker, is with the Cape Breton Development Corporation. This was a fund that, when the federal government closed down DevCo, could have taken the excess funds. The government of the day, who are still there basically, the same group are there, could have said, you know what we're going to do is, this is a hard-pressed economy. What we're going to do is take that $30-some million and share it equitably among the people who paid into it, the retirees and their widows. But no, Mr. Speaker, the federal government, instead of being Robin Hood, they end up being King John. They've basically gone and said, look, we want all that money. We don't want to share any of it with the workers and the widows of Cape Breton. We want, yes, I've been corrected, Prince John. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to, what we're going to do is make you fight for this. We're going to make you go and hire lawyers and get your unions involved and everything, and we're going to have to fight you for this. So, Mr. Speaker, where does that leave those folks today? I mean, they're working on pensions that are just barely getting by. You've people, many of the widows living on their own. This isn't a windfall for them, Mr. Speaker. it would just be a little bit more comfort in their golden years, Mr. Speaker. But instead, they have to go and rely on the graciousness of other groups to come to Halifax and sit in chambers here with the retired justice and to fight their own government for money that was theirs. I would say, Mr. Speaker, the money involved is less, or just maybe a little bit more, than a third of what the ad scandal cost. So, Mr. Speaker, I would say if we've got the Liberal ad scandal, Mr. Speaker, so I'm saying if it was good for that, I'm certainly sure that this would be money well spent for those families that live and reside in my community, Mr. Speaker. But no, we're there. Now, you know, the reason I bring that up, Mr. Speaker, because it's a point that if we're going to invest in pension funds, there's a certain amount of unknown what you buy into. You're buying into, hopefully a system that your investments will create a pool of money when you either get to retirement age or close to it and can maneuver out of it, that you can live comfortably. But, Mr. Speaker, some groups say, you know, well, that's good. And then we try to work towards it. Then there's another group that are in these groups that can buy with plans that have grown in. So, Mr. Speaker, that's where we find with this bill. Now, the government will have you believe the biggest problem that they're facing and they have to get rid of is the plans include a group of people that they'll never ever be able to access this fund, because the likelihood of those people going under are minuscule, very, very small. But you know, Mr. Speaker, why are we here today complaining about this provision of a pension fund, and why weren't we here 5 years ago? Well, the reason is because of the way the markets have been acting, Mr. Speaker. You know, when places like Hawker Siddeley, when they were wound down, this provision was a literal godsend to those families. These were people at a time when Hawker Siddeley was shutting down, were in an area of extreme high employment, where their real employment was not available, and maybe some of them, just maybe, some of them that were able to access the growing section of it, were to get part-time work or something that could elongate what would be in their salary, Mr. Speaker. But if we pass this today as it stands, if we pass this to cover all the pension funds that are contemplated under this act, then those people lose that. Now, Mr. Speaker, another group were the Ultramar workers over across the harbour. Another group that had fairly good wages, were working in a bit better climate economically than folks in Pictou County and other areas were, but nonetheless had found themselves in that real hard spot in their lives of being in that area which I find myself, Mr. Speaker, under 55 but over 50. So, Mr. Speaker, what you have is, while I know we're not allowed to discriminate against workers, but you know, when you go out and you market yourself in that area, especially coming from an industrial background, they don't want that style of workers. A lot of will look for the young guy that's 22, 23 years old for a couple of reasons. That he's probably in better shape, his ideas are a little bit newer, and he brings a lower wage package. So it's hard to market yourself. But with the grow-in provision, it allowed these folks, again, to kind of diversify and change their lifestyle a bit, to top up, and to be allowed to be parts of an economic society. And that's what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker. If an employer shuts down his operation, there's a right the employee should expect. Through no fault of their own, they should have the right to be able to sustain themselves in the economy in a meaningful way. But if we take this slowly on the narrow-minded way the government moved forward, then we're all in trouble. Because what we will end up being is we'll get rid of this for everybody because there was a little problem over here. And we're not really even convinced that the problem is unsustainable over here, because what we're looking for is, as the markets move, and I know the markets in this instance are tied somewhat to interest rates, but if they both move in an area, in a manner that's appreciative, then these funds may grow themselves. And we may be back here debating sometime in the not too distant future, Mr. Speaker, about the ability of people in these funds that would have a benefits or a premium holiday, that they may say, look, you don't have to pay premiums anymore. It's so funded. So it's pension funds are that. I mean, it's, as many of us in this chamber, Mr. Speaker, have probably invested in registered retirement savings plans. Do you panic when your plan you're in a 10-year plan and your benefit and your packages and your portfolio is doing well, and then about year 4 it starts to drop? And is the sky falling, and do you go out and try to rejig the whole thing? No. Most financial analysts will say you hang in there because it's an average over a long length of time. And this is what we're not understand. The minister brought this bill forward. He really didn't do any, to my estimation, any kind of wide consultations, either with the private sector or with other groups, other parties that I can tell of in any great way. I know members of our caucus met with the superintendent of pensions. I don't know if the third party did or not, but nonetheless. But it seems to be coming up time after time in discussions here is that its impact on municipalities. So let's look at it from that perspective. Why don't we just narrow it down? Why does this bill deal with the impact of these grow-in funds on municipalities? But no, the minister wants to leave this window wide open. So it becomes, because of lack of consultation, it gets our suspicious nature going, Mr. Speaker. Why? Now, I've been told by one member of this House, there's another group out there that's adversely affected by these grow-in funds. And that's the Diocese of Antigonish, the church and so on, that they're negatively affected. But again, that we've got to look at that and say, okay, let's shed some light on it. One could easily say, Mr. Speaker, that the Diocese of Antigonish is never going to be wound up. Well, we don't know that, Mr. Speaker. We see right across the peninsula of Halifax, and we see in many places in Cape Breton, where you see parishes being amalgamated, churches shutting down or not being used as much, Mr. Speaker. So is there some point that the Holy See will say to the Catholic bishops here in Canada, well, you know what? The Catholic bishops are going to say, look, you know, we don't need 3 dioceses in Nova Scotia. We don't need one. We'll have the Diocese of Halifax, and we'll run it all out of there. We don't need one in Antigonish, and we don't need one in Yarmouth. So let's do that. So in effect, the 2 wings could be wound down. So that would help some of those workers. That would help the ones that are direct employees, I would suspect, of the Diocese of Antigonish. I don't know how individual contracts would affect parishioners and parochial workers in various parishes across the province. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, these are all problems that are facing us in this bill that the minister has brought forward. Now, you know, the minister brought this bill forward last week and said in his press release, or in his press conference, in an answer to one of the media personnel, do you have support for this? And he said, yeah, I'll paraphrase him, but the other two parties support us. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's just not factual. At no point we hadn't seen the bill until that morning. As I said to you, we met with the superintendent of pensions and we heard what that person had to say, but at no point did we say that we would be supporting this bill in whole or in part. So, you know, this is the problem. But yet, the minister, we go to the minister and say, okay, you administer what? Through there, about 140 plans. So what we're looking for from the minister is break it down. Who's affected? Now, we've brought out some of the groups that are affected. We've brought forward Amira and Stanfields and Michelin are some of the ones that are out there. There may be other smaller ones, Mr. Speaker. So we don't know what the impact is going to be on those employees. We don't know what impacts would be, say, on, okay, Amira is one with unionized employees. I would think that this legislation would supersede what they have in their collective agreement. So all of a sudden, this is something that workers worked long and hard on to secure in case whatever Amira closes a very large chunk because I think the legislation says in whole or in part closure. So what happens to these people, Mr. Speaker, is they're saying, oh, no, I know your unions and your folks negotiate long and hard, but it's gone. I can't speak, say, for the people at Stanfields or Michelin, but maybe, you know, that they have some kind of employee organization that, while not qualify under the Trade Union Act, but maybe recognized by the employer, who do some sort of bidding or discussion with the employer, and through the years of bringing this forward, the employer agrees with it. But they see it as a cost, but nonetheless, they move forward. So all of a sudden, they come in and say, look, we know that you've got this in here and whatever, but you're gone. And so it hurts. It hurts these workers. And what this is about, Mr. Speaker, with the real exception of having to pay higher premiums, and I understand where that's at. But, you know, Mr. Speaker, some ways here, unless we have further investigation, we may very well be looking at using a maul hammer to kill an ant here, Mr. Speaker. What we've got to say is, it's like in collective bargaining, when you put tough rules in around layoff provisions and the penalties that will be incurred by the employer if you lay off large groups of people. And they're not there so much to move the day forward. Speaker, that type of language is put in collective agreements to saying, look, we both agree with you. We're both on the same page here. We don't want worst case scenario. But if worst case scenario befalls us, we want the landing to be as softly as possible. And that's what I say about pension funds with grow-in provisions. That's why they're there. And they shouldn't be taken away at the whim of government, because in a period when the market isn't doing as well and interest rates aren't where they're at, that we should be doing this. I think we have to look at it with a much more longer view than this, because if it was being looked at with a long view, Mr. Speaker, they would have theoretically have passed this bill in the spring. So with this bill, they're seriously reversing their position from less than 5 months ago. So we have to ask ourselves yet again, why is this bill in front of us? You know, we've maybe like some of the other caucuses today, Mr. Speaker, have met with folks from Mercer Financial and met with the group that represents the participants in the pension plan here in HRM about their worries. And I think what they're saying are real serious worries, and we agree with them. And we're willing to work with getting these rectified. But rectified at what cost? At other workers being put in a position that was never contemplated and was never necessary. We know what the cost is going to be at HRM. Clearly, because it's jointly administered with both management and labor working together on this, Mr. Speaker. So that's not the real problem here, Mr. Speaker. The real problem is when pressed, when the minister is asked who is going to be hurt, how many employees, he simply shrugs his shoulders. And these are questions that I think have to be asked. You know, how would this adversely affect the workers at Stanfield's? How will that happen? How will that? Do we know? So this is but the minister won't tell us this. The minister says, I don't know. Why don't you do that? Why don't you go out and give us, you know, I got a few days to spend in here, I got a few weeks, got a few months to spend in here. Let's find these out before we go make a decision. You know, I don't know what type of pension provisions our friends in the Truro area get when they leave Stanfield's. I hope they're good. I hope it's between a good joint labor management group that they've come up with a package that's good for them all. But Mr. Speaker, we don't know whether this is going to hurt them. But what we're talking about here, Mr. Speaker, is heaven forbid if the financial stability of that company was affected by and it's a prime example. I mean, they're a beacon of light in an industry that's been crippled by third world domination in manufacturing of clothing, Mr. Speaker. They've survived. Stanfields have survived, Mr. Speaker, in that harsh market because of high quality goods and a very good workforce. But Mr. Speaker, don't kid yourself that every day that business in the textile sector is under attack by places that pay slave wages. So if as hard as the management and the owners of that mill can work to keep those people working, and they do their darndest with no fault of their own, the international market pressures are so great that they go out of business. No guarantees. That companies like Walmart decides, because they rule the retail market, that, you know what, we used to buy T-shirts from you at X amount of gross, and now we're going to pay only Y. And so where does it go? Even that sector for a hardworking entrepreneurs or the people of the Truro area at Stanfield would have a hard time sustaining. That's the reality of it. So if that pressure is allowed to happen, and the grow-in provision is exonerated from the pension funds, then what happens? What happens, Mr. Speaker, is we've had people being taken out in their prime earning years with no real growth in their pension fund. This is not a factor, and I can't say it enough, it's not a factor of Stanfield being a bad business, because I think, as I said before, it's an icon in Nova Scotia, and it's an icon in North America. But it's one that how long can you sustain the international pressures that are put on it? So what happens? Because we've brought in such a large bill with so many holes in it that we've taken away some rights for those workers because of someone in a third world country knitting a T-shirt for X amount and we can't compete anymore. That's what this bill would have the effect of doing. So we're not talking about that, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, let's even go to one that people would not see as this party as being the greatest friends of, Mr. Speaker, but Michelin. But, Mr. Speaker, what I am is a friend of workers. And again, Mr. Speaker, as long as those people are there, it's obviously, you know, like what my personal feelings on Michelin are as a management group, they do, from what I'm told, make good tires. And that's part and parcel of a good workforce. And they were right in coming to Nova Scotia. I think Nova Scotia sold itself somewhat short, but coming to Nova Scotia, because I'm proud of the Nova Scotia workforce, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud whether it's there or it's in Cape Breton or it's in Amherst or Spring Hill, anywhere, Mr. Speaker, any place. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that Michelin is a large international producer of tires. And the same tactics that drew them to Nova Scotia may drive them to South Carolina. And isn't it up to us, since we brought them here, to keep the grow-in provision here, Mr. Speaker, so that those folks can enjoy the best possible pension that they've been able to lever from their employer, or, fairness, being granted by their employer. If we take this from them by way of legislation, these folks lose it, Mr. Speaker. Another employer, and these are, you know, when we asked, someone asked earlier today when the other members were up, member from Halifax Fairview was up, someone was saying, well, where'd you get these names of Emera, Stanfields, and Michelin? Well, it was the Mercer people, Mercer Financial Group, that told us these are some of the companies that have grow-in plans. And that was 3 more companies, 140 that we got from them. And what we got from the minister, with the exception of some municipalities, we got 0 in the line of private corporations that would be affected by this. So, Mr. Speaker, what we would hope to show in this is, look, certainly, if a case can be made for municipalities exiting this fund, then let's look at it and deal with it on that level. But in the absence of government coming forward and saying, here's the other groups in there, what it tells me is that there's no plan with this bill. They have not told us there's 5 people more, there's 6 people, here they are, and here's how they'll be affected. No, we're really buying a pig in a poke here, Mr. Speaker, and that's wrong. So if government wants support from our party on this, is what our message is quite simple to government, is open up. Let's really see how this is going to impact working women and men in this province. We don't want workers not having adequate coverage from their pension plan because of some third world nation comes in and floods our market with cheap underwear and Stanfields are shut down. Mr. Speaker, that's what I'm saying. That's what we've got to... That's why these things are in here. Plans like this just don't come together and someone decides to put in a grow-in plan. There has to be a reason for it. And that's the minister's lost sight of that altogether. He's gone to not to look at the wholeness of the plan, but he's looking at the singular, but he's drug everything else in behind him. If we have problems, I can't say this enough, Mr. Speaker, there's problems with municipalities and the pressure it will put on their taxation level and their pressure on giving their services to the constituents, then, Mr. Speaker, let's get at that. Let's do that one. Let's straighten it out. But don't give or take away rights from workers just because you have to get out one section, Mr. Speaker. It's much like having one leg that's got gangrene in it and you cut both of them off. This is what this minister is basically doing here. Let's get rid of the good leg too. This works. This helps. It helps workers, Mr. Speaker. So why not keep it? So these are the questions the minister has to come forward with to explain to this bill. Because I said from the get-go, Mr. Speaker, there was some misinformation around this bill that for him to tell media that we supported this bill. The only thing we did with this bill, Mr. Speaker, was we had a meeting with the superintendent of pensions, and we talked to the lady at the time, and we told her some of our concerns around it, wanted to know some answers, and then the next thing you know, we were having a bill briefing. There was no answers around the amount of people in the plan. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll be taking my place shortly, but I want to get those on the record, Mr. Speaker. And it's important that the minister understands them through you, Mr. Speaker, because these are real fundamental problems that if this bill is allowed to go forward in its form, it could have devastating effects on many good companies, many good workers that really don't see this as a problem. But because of outside economic pressures, they will see if their employer has to stop or reduce business dramatically, they will see themselves without a benefit that they would have had the day before this bill passed. I think it says to the minister, do the right thing. You are also the Minister for Labor, is to look at this, protect the workers, do the right thing when it comes to protecting the municipalities, but make sure you're doing the right thing. And don't bring them all in with a trawl net, use a line. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to stand and speak on this bill. It's a very, very serious concern for the businesses that aren't aware of what's happening here at the present time, and the employees of the businesses that work for those companies. The grow-in benefit, and I'm going to use an example of Halifax Regional Municipality, and I think this can apply to not just the regional municipality, but every company that's covered by this process. And I've got some facts, and I will table this at the end when I'm finished here, that I'd like to table for all members to see and be aware of. And there's been a lot of fear-mongering going on by my honourable members in the NDP, and a lot of misconception that's been put out there that hopefully we'll be able to clear up with some facts, not just ideas that they may have, or not bother to take the time and find out what's going on here. I'm just going to use a municipality to start with, and first of all, I'm going to let the municipal taxpayer know what the impact is to every property in the municipality. We've got about 130,000 properties in HRM that are taxed right now, property tax on them. Those are the people that are going to be paying the bill for this grow-in benefit. And this grow-in benefit in the first year is going to cost the regional municipality, and I'm going to talk about the employees later, $12 million the first year. $12 million. And every year after that, for a number of years, it's going to cost them $6 million, actually 5 years altogether. Now, with $6 million a year cost, it's going to equate to 2.2 cents per $100 of assessment property tax increase. That's a property tax increase that you and I, as property owners, and anyone who owns property in regional municipalities is going to have to pay. But in the first year, it's going to be 4.5 cents. 4.5 cents in the first year to pay this bill. Now what that equates to on a $100,000 home is in 1 year, just 1 year, and it has to be doubled this first year, would be $23. And the first year would actually be $43, where it hadn't been done in the past year, because the municipality had hoping this would get out of place, not be put in place. The average home assessment in the regional municipality is $141,000, and that equates to $32 per year over the 5 years, but again, the first year is $64. Now, that's what it's going to cost the taxpayer. So basically what's happening, the NDP is saying that they want to put the property taxes up for everybody in the regional municipality to pay for this. Okay? So I want to make that very, very clear. That's what could happen and very likely may happen. Now, the other alternative in this is to reduce services. Reduce services. Or the other thing is, if they had the $6 million to spend, $6 million that they would have to come up from somewhere, here's some of the things they could buy with $6 million. Now, everybody remember, and if my colleagues opposite here had done the research, they would have had this information as well. And I believe it was presented to them today, and they just didn't bother mentioning it because it didn't suit their agenda. But the services, things that they could buy with $6 million, 15 new transit buses. That means 15 new bus routes, more service for the busing in the regional municipality, which is desperately needed. They could do a 40%, that $6 million is 40% of the capital budget for repairs to roads. So they could take 40% of the budget for repairs to roads in the regional municipality, and what the roads would all fall apart. They're having a hard enough time keeping up with it now. It would almost finance the complete cost of the finance department in the regional municipality. Think about that. You eliminate everybody who works at the finance department, then you can't collect your taxes anymore or do anything else. It would mean, if you had $6 million, and that we're talking earlier about having more police officers, would mean 75 new police officers. 75 new police officers you could hire. 75 of them. It also means that you could also put in 75 new playgrounds. Well, I can tell you, I was a regional councillor for a number of years, and a new playground in a community is a very important thing. And it's very, very difficult to put these things in place. Now, I didn't hassle the NDP when they were talking. I left them alone. And I would ask them not to do that for me because they may not want to hear the facts, right? And it's quite interesting. And this has come forward from the regional municipality and the pension administrators. Well, you should have read the document. I did. Yeah, you should have read the document. And Murphy was in the room handing it out. Anyway, you'd like to make a point when you stand up and make your point. But okay, let's talk about that's what's going to happen to the taxpayers and the service in the municipality. It could potentially happen. Now remember, all these things are doubled in the first year. So you could put in 150 new playgrounds in the first year, what it's going to cost, instead of 75. You could buy 30 new transit buses instead of 15. So it goes on and on. So you're looking at a possible tax increase, a substantial tax increase, or reduction in services, or some things you could buy with the $6 million. The option would be to the municipality, but there's definitely a cost there. There's a long-term cost, and it would hurt the municipality and the taxpayers in the municipality. Now, the real kicker is the employees. Now, evidently, either the NDP didn't learn how to read or they don't understand what's going on, but they had the employees with $30,000 a year average income is increased a contribution of $1,200 per year. That's $1,200 per year and a $30,000 salary. Now you can imagine going home to your husband and wife and saying, look, that has to stay home and look after the children. Guess what? We're going to have a $1,200 cut in my pay this year because this growing benefit in the pension plan, which is really no use to us anyway because the municipality is going to be around long after I'm gone and all of us here are gone. It's going to mean $1,200 out of our household budget. That's $100 a month. That's a big impact, especially if you're making $30,000 a year. So that's a net decrease in take-home pay of $900 a year. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And it's very interesting to say, you know, the NDP's been over there, they've been saying how it's going to negatively impact all the people, and well, it's going to negatively impact them all right. And the companies, this is such a complex issue. I don't believe the companies and the employees of the companies really understand how negative this is going to be on them. And I'm going to give you a letter here from the Halifax Professional Firefighters. There's already some other letters put forward. And I'm just going to read this right here. I'll read it into the record. Subject pension regulation changes. We request members of the we as members of the International Association of Firefighters, who are members of Halifax Regional Municipality Pension Plan, the Halifax Regional Pension Committee is seeking relief from the onerous requirements of the Pension Benefit Act in respect of the pension plan solvency, in particular the elimination of the applicability of grow-in provisions on the pension plan to the pension plan and other municipal plans in the province. These provisions are causing financial hardships for our membership. Financial hardships for our memberships. Right? They forgot to mention that. They have this document. The requested exemptions will provide flexibility to the municipalities without compromising security of pension benefits. Pension benefits. And we are writing to express our support for these initiatives and ask you to address these matters raised by the committee. And this is signed by Phil McNaughty, President, Local 264, International Firefighters Association. I'd like to table that. So it goes on to say, so employees are going to be affected. They're going to be negatively affected by this. And it's going to have a major impact on them. Now, when you really start looking at the effect of this, not only is it going to affect them immediately, not only immediately, but it's going to affect them in the long term. In the long term, it's going to affect people, potentially, that are already on a pension. They could reduce their benefits to help pay for the increased cost on this to the program. They're going to have to build bigger reserves. So therefore, when the people come to retire down the road that are paid the higher premium, their benefits actually could be lower. And these are things that haven't been told. They've come along here, they've been saying how it's going to negatively impact all these people in the province. And there aren't that many companies in the province this is going to affect. So when you look at this, and you see the cost of the municipality, table that, the cost of the municipality to the taxpayers of the municipality, not the municipality, the cost to the employees within the municipality, and this is an example. I stress this is an example. What about Dalhousie University? What about Acadia University? What about St. Anne? And some of the other municipalities would have this program in place. And the worst of this is we're led to believe by the honourable members opposite here that this is a horrible thing and it cannot be put in place. Well, it can be put in place because you can negotiate this in an agreement with your employer between the employees. But at least they would know then what the cost is. They're willing to pay the cost and they're willing to move forward on a voluntary basis. And that may be a very wonderful thing to do in some industries and some places. But this has to be eliminated at the present time to protect these things. And anyone that has a company that has this, or an employee of a company that has this, you want to check on your costs and want to see what kind of a impact it has on your long-term pension with when these things are put in place. So there is a decline in people paying into pension plans in Canada, and this would decline it even further. I deal with so many people in my area and other areas I've represented. They're living on very small fixed income, and then the whole problem comes back to the province and the federal government. They need affordable housing. NDP's always asking for affordable housing. Where do you think it comes from? It comes from the taxpayers. I agree we need better affordable housing, more affordable housing. But if we had good pension plans in place for all of Nova Scotians, we wouldn't need those special programs and another burden on our system. And the people would live, they'd be prouder, and they'd be able to live and enjoy life a lot easier than they do now. So we really have to push these things. And there was some doubt expressed by one of the members of the NDP about HRM's ability to manage this thing, HRM's benefit. Maybe they said maybe they could make better investments, so on. Well, HRM doesn't manage HRM's pension plan. The pension plan is run by a committee of union, employees, and staff from HRM, completely independent from regional council completely independent from administration of the regional municipality. It's done the way it should be done. They administer their own program, and they do an exceptionally good job. And they did this, they've merged 5 or more pension plans to one. They've taken the considerations of all the different plans and worked out an agreement that's been very well accepted by all the employees. And this is really an employee-driven, and it should be, program. So the employees are coming and saying, take this away. But we're being told that no, it's not the employees. It's going to destroy the employees, and nobody's going to get ahead with this thing. So they want to check their facts before they decide to move this, and say it's such a one horrible thing to happen, and it's not going to really help anyone in the area. This has to be changed. It has to be changed in the immediate future. And I stress again, I don't believe the companies out here and the employees of those companies understand the impact it's going to have on them, and it has had on them, that could make their benefits a lot better and indeed help them. So with that, I'm going to close my remarks, and thank you very much.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have a number of comments I wanted to make on this bill number 129, which is to remove the grow-in benefits from the Pension Act. First of all, I think that the government has done the right thing in bringing this amendment back to the House. In the spring session, it had been one of many clauses included in the Financial Measures Act. In fact, there were 53 clauses in the Financial Measures Act. And at that time, both the NDP and ourselves had said that the process was wrong and that a change to pension should be looked at on their own merits and separately. And that is exactly what the government has done by bringing this bill forward now. And I think that that is the right thing, and I'd like to thank them for doing so. And the reason that it's important that we look at it independently is because that allows us not to have it just swept by and not understanding the implications, but actually having an opportunity to look at them. And I think questions that have been raised by the NDP, some of which were overly alarmist, have caused us to look carefully at how many companies are involved and what's exactly involved in this. It was mentioned, about our role as legislators, and that it's our role to get all the facts as much as you possibly can, and then move forward and make decisions that are in the best interest of Nova Scotians. We have to measure the cost and the benefit of all measures that come before us and try and do what we think is best for the majority of people. In the case of this bill about grow-in benefits, I think everybody fully understands what benefits are these days. The actual number of pension plans that were referred to is 140. Now, what we were told was that of those, roughly 80% are defined contribution plans. If that, in fact, is the case, then we're talking about possibly 30, give or take, 30 plans that are defined benefit plans. And among those plans, there are obviously municipalities, hospitals, universities, that really the benefit of the benefit they're being called on to pay for is never going to be realized. They're not going to have to face insolvency. And we know that even as they change form, that there's a commitment to keep them in place, whether it be municipalities or universities or hospital boards. So they're not going to become insolvent, and yet good money is being taken out of the government coffers, out of the pockets of their plan members to cover for that eventuality, to cover that risk that will not be realized. And in the case of HRM, which has received the most attention in this debate, the case has become urgent. And that's one reason why I applaud the government for bringing this back, because when it became obvious that HRM is in a financial crisis as a result of this, the government has moved and brought it forward. Now, there seems to be no question that public sector organizations should not be held to this particular clause for grow-in benefits, because it is being asked to put a ton of money aside for no benefit whatsoever. So let's look briefly at the HRM example. We're told that they have only, in fact, any organization that's found to be underfunded has only 5 years to cover that shortfall. And in the case of HRM, they're unfunded to the tune of about $60 million. So that equates to $6 million a year that they'll have to, over 5 years, would have to put aside just to cover that eventuality. Now, since they postponed that by 1 year, hoping that this grow-in benefit would be gone, this current year they're going to have to put aside $12 million. And we've already heard what the impact is for their plan members. They'll be losing literally thousands of dollars that they will have to pay into the plan to keep it solvent. And that's out of their pocket after tax dollars, discretionary dollars that they have very few of, are going to now go into covering a risk that doesn't exist for them. So it is a crisis when $60 million has to be found from plan members and from HRM in such a short period of time. So, I think that we can all agree that in the case of public sector organizations, this clause is wrong and should be eliminated. So the question might come up, why are we doing the elimination of grow-in benefits for all organizations? What's the rationale for taking it out for private sector organizations as well?
Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park has the floor.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I think it's noteworthy to go to the fact that model pension legislation has been drafted just in the last year alone, and that was drafted by drafted by the Canadian Association of Pension Supervisory Authorities. So pension supervisors from across the country got together to come up with what they felt would be draft model best practices for pension legislation. And it's very noteworthy that there is no grow-in provision provided for in that model legislation. And the reason for that is because it's a rare thing in Canada to begin with. Only Ontario, the only other province besides Nova Scotia, has this benefit. And it was introduced in the 1980s when times were very good and when business was booming in Ontario. And for some reason, Nova Scotia chose to follow suit at that time and make it a requirement for defined benefit plans to have this provision for grow-in benefits. But in effect, no other provinces, even provinces that have significant wealth and a lot of industrial companies, none of them have followed suit. And bear in mind that there is nothing at all in removing the grow-in benefits from the Pension Act that prevents companies from having grow-in benefits. If unions or employers and employees want to negotiate that kind of a benefit, it's available. And it will continue to be available if it's in somebody's collective agreement or especially negotiated. But what we're saying is it doesn't need to be a standard clause in pension benefits. And again, only those companies that offer enhanced early retirement benefits to begin with will have any need to call upon the grow-in benefit if they were wound down. And very few companies have these enhanced benefits. So even if they have a defined benefit plan, which we've said might be 20% of our total pensions, even if they have that defined benefit plan, many of them will not have an enhanced early retirement clause. If they don't, there's nothing for these employees to grow into, so to speak, if the organization were closed down or wound down. So it becomes more and more of a benefit that only a very small number of people could ever possibly have access to or need. And if you have enhanced early retirement benefits, you'll still get them. So the grow-in benefit doesn't, accelerate this. So they will be available to most employees anyway. So what we're finding is more and more pension plans are being wound down or converted to defined contribution plans because they're simply too rich. People just cannot afford them anymore. And a lot of organizations, as we heard earlier, don't have defined benefit plans, which are the best plans, the best protection for people as they approach retirement. And we know that very few, I believe it's 29% of Canadians that currently have a pension plan at all. So we're in a country and in a position where very few people are getting the protection that they need through their work and being able to contribute to plans that will protect them when they become retirees. I wanted to table, while we're talking about this, another document that comes from the universities explaining their position and their reason why they would like to see this removed. In talking about it, they said there are a number of universities, and you'll note that not all of them have defined benefit plans, and I think people consider universities a good group to work for. But of the universities in Nova Scotia, Dalhousie, Acadia, Université Sainte Anne, and the University of King's College have defined benefit plans. And they're saying, again, that the underfunded nature of these plans and the fact that they are really at risk because of the grow-in benefits, that's causing them considerable concern, and that universities like Dalhousie are saying they foresee a significant deficiency on the next filing. It said funding the shortfall at Acadia University over 5 years would result in a burden of approximately $2.6 million per year, in addition to the normal annual contribution fees for the plan. So you can see that even our universities are going to be called on to have a lot of additional cost as a result of growing benefits, and we all know who pays for additional expenses at universities. That falls back on our university students, and they're already paying the highest tuition in the country. So I don't think we need to create a situation where there's any more financial pressure placed on universities. And again, for what? For what benefit will they ever receive? So I would like to table that just so that it's a matter of record that the universities are also, and as we well know, adversely affected by this, or certainly those that are covered by this legislation. I think it's really important to look at, who is involved and who's not. That's for you, thanks. I'll just gather my thoughts. There are a lot of exceptions already. We were going into the question of why should public service and private sector organizations be exempt from this provision. So if we're going to be amending the Pension Act as it is and taking out grow-in benefits for, let's say, just HRM or just one or two universities, it opens up the question about what is good public policy, and is it good public policy to then look at the other companies and organizations that are affected? And yes, it is. It's good to measure that, because we know that the cost of this growing benefit is creating a real burden, a serious burden for all of these organizations, and a detriment to business to offer defined benefit plans, and even a detriment to reinvesting those monies that they would otherwise have into new jobs or into an expansion of their facilities. I think in a province like Nova Scotia, we need to do all we can to improve and enhance our industrial base and to encourage companies that are here to reinvest in Nova Scotia. And when we have provisions in our laws that are richer than those in other jurisdictions, it's a detriment, and it discourages people from participating. And I think that overall, we want to see more employees covered by pension plans and more people that get these benefits, not fewer, and not creating a situation where pension plans are converted to defined contribution or changed in some way, which does happen, as everyone knows. This grow-in benefit has been defined as a Cadillac provision, and that's why it's available in so few places or made mandatory in so few places. But remember, again, it's not going to become something that's unavailable in Nova Scotia. If an employer can afford it, and if a union or employee group can demand it, and that happens to be agreed upon, fine, it's available. And there are other jurisdictions in Canada where it's certainly applied, but not made mandatory, and it's the mandatory nature of it which we have a problem with. In the long run, what we want to do is create a situation that's best for all Nova Scotians, that improves our climate for workers and for business, and that certainly removes a restriction that right now is just creating a financial burden for no benefit. So as I say, HRM is the face of this grow-in benefit when you look at why it's totally unnecessary for public service organizations. And again, I think it's important to reiterate the kind of costs that are going to come out of HRM's pockets, and that means an increase in taxes. I think you have to look at that every time. And I think that when we look at that, there are so many of us that represent HRM ridings right here in the House of Assembly. If you look at the constituencies that we represent, we'll be talking about significant extra taxes in order to raise another $12 million this year alone. So in their coming budget of 2005, HRM taxpayers will be asked for an additional $12 million for no enhanced services, for nothing improved, but simply to set aside this money in an account against a risk that is non-existent. That doesn't make sense to the plan contributors, to their members, and as has been mentioned, all of the unions of HRM are unanimously in support of seeing this benefit taken away. They don't want it, they don't feel there's any benefit, and they know that it's taking thousands of dollars out of their pockets and out of the services that HRM can provide. So we're either going to see, even in terms of HRM's plan, in a great reduction in the benefits that their plan members will see, or they'll have to agree to huge increases in their contributions towards that plan. And that just isn't reasonable in their case at all. And again, I think that we have a responsibility as HRM representatives to protect the taxpayers that we represent, because it's all the same person, whether we're talking about a municipal service that's being offered or a provincial service, Mr. Speaker. We're talking about the same taxpayer at the end of the day, and that taxpayer is overburdened in every sense. And what we want to do is try and minimize that. It's kind of interesting that this amount of money for a house that's valued at $140,000, we're talking about $35 a year additional cost. And I know in my riding of Halifax Clayton Park, the average home is around $200,000, so it's that much more in Clayton Park. But even if we took that to be $35 out of everyone's pocket, every property owner, the 130,000 registered property owners in HRM, all paying extra taxes for no benefit. And I think that that's unconscionable. I think that it's wrong for members here to have hypothetical sort of conspiracy theories that are driving them really to take a dogmatic position that is in direct opposition to the people that we represent. Because everything here has been very upfront in terms of the costs and the impacts certainly on all the public service institutions. And when we look seriously at the private sector organizations, we know that the benefit will still be available. Nobody is taking that benefit away from anybody in any organization. Again, it's simply not going to be a mandatory requirement. I have to refer somewhat to the conspiracy theory that seems to be going about Mercer, and the fact that they use their envelopes to send HRM correspondence. I found that, really quite humorous, because in speaking to the plan members, they say they have no full-time staff, and that the pension plan at HRM is a joint trustee plan. It is not administered by HRM. HRM staff themselves do not administer and take care of all the day-to-day work of this. So they, in fact, do have consultants that do the work for them and work with them. But they are a very well-informed pension committee, very intelligent, very well-researched. They have an excellently managed plan, and they have representation from management and unionized and non-unionized employee groups. And all of them unanimously have said that this should go, that this provision has to go. So as I say, having no staff of their own, they do have third-party administration, and I think that it's a little bit far-fetched to suggest that it's part of a worldwide plot that begins here in Nova Scotia to eliminate grow-in benefits, which again only exist in one other jurisdiction in Canada, that being Ontario, and again have not been enshrined in model pension legislation that has just been developed. So what we see here is something who's an amendment whose time has come, and the urgency is there for us immediately here in HRM. But looking forward, the urgency is for all organizations, because I don't think we want to be the representatives who sat in the legislature while all kinds of defined benefit plans wrap up and decide that they're not going to be offered anymore to workers in Nova Scotia. Because we can't, it's unreasonable to assume that we could have the richest benefits, richer than any other provinces, richer than the model pension legislation that's out there. I think we have to look at what's best for the majority of workers, and I know that whether they were in a public or a private sector organization, people want benefits and they want to have protection, but they don't necessarily want to pay gigantic premiums. They have many other pressing needs. They probably have to pay for home heating fuel, and perhaps if we look at the increase in taxes next year, it might be just about equal to the home heating fuel rebates that we'd like to see happen. So I'd also like to table another letter that we have that was in support of the HRM Pension Committee and their request to have this removed, and it comes from the retired pensioners, and I'll just leave that with you for the record as well. It's a similar one. It says that it is causing financial hardship to our members. And as I say, I think this is the tip of the iceberg. What we know is that as other funds hit the same wall and become underfunded as a result of this provision, they're all going to face the same financial crisis. So surely we can have the good foresight to look ahead and realize that there are, it's really almost nobody. We can't even name any groups that have benefited in recent times. And I think that's been addressed. As I say, there are very, very few that would ever come into the situation where they would get this. And most of them, in fact, Ultramar was mentioned a little while ago. It was my understanding that Ultramar had very special provisions set up for severance for the people who were working there. And that would have been part and parcel of the severance packages they negotiated. It really was irrelevant that there were grow-in provisions in Nova Scotia. Because in an instance like that, when you have a credible employer, they generally have provisions for that sort of thing. I think the same thing is true with Sydney Steel, that there were special provisions made for severance for people who were losing their employment. So I think that what we see is that in some cases this is absolutely redundant. And another thing that's really important and points to some hypocrisy in the NDP ranks, I'm afraid, is that all the union administered...
I think the honourable member knows the word hypocrisy is unacceptable.
No, I'm sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
Perhaps
However, I
you may want to
apologize.
reword it.
A contradiction, perhaps, in their thinking would be a better way to put it.
It's a little better.
An inconsistency, perhaps. But I'd like to point out that the multi-employer pension plans, and that is those pension plans that are managed by unions, are already exempt from this, as is the Public Service Commission, as are certain other organizations. It's my understanding that Emera is exempt from this also under their legislation. So what you have now is a piecemeal effect where individual groups, whether it's HRM or the universities or Emera themselves, which are one of our largest employers, coming forward and saying to the government, please exempt us, just take us out and there'll be no problem. Well, now is the time to simply eliminate this benefit because it simply doesn't apply and is not good sense, as I say, and it is not model pension legislation. It just isn't. And I don't believe that Nova Scotia should have it on their books, and so now's the time to deal with both aspects, public and private sector, and simply, once and for all say that this is not a benefit that we need to legislate. Again, it's available to companies or groups should they require it. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to close my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. If I recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly would like to thank the people who participated in the debate. It was lively and certainly gave a lot of information to the floor. I look forward to following this bill through law amendments, and at this point in time, I would like to close second reading on Bill 129.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 129. All those in favour, say aye. Contrary minded? The motion is carried.
Bill 129, title and act to amend Chapter 340 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Pension Benefits Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to law amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
There's still a couple of things to do. I'd like to have the approbation of the House to revert to presenting reports of committees.
Is that agreed? Seems unanimous. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill number 111, an act respecting the Office of Acadian Affairs and delivery of French language services by the Public Service. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Referred to the Committee of the Whole House for a future day. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, would you please call the order of business private members' public bills for second reading?
Private members' bills.
Public bills for second reading.
Yes, for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 132, the Amusement Devices Safety Act?
Bill number 132, the Amusement Devices Act. I recognize the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Here.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in this legislature as an important happening in my riding over the summer months. And we all like to go to amusement parks, and all over this province we have one that was built by the province down Upper Clements Park and that. And so the safety of the children using these rides were very important to me as I was there. There was a young kid in a constituent of mine, Arlene Oakley, her son. The water that's recycled back up to the slide sometimes has to be, these pumps have to pump the water back up, and they suck the water back up. Actually, there was 2 children that were drowned in Texas earlier this year on the same thing. They were caught in the recycling pump and they were drowned. In this case here in North Sydney, the young boy was caught in the recycling pump, and his leg was severely damaged. It took over 40 stitches, 32 on the outside and 8 stitches on the inside to close it up. He was 9 years old, severely, but that wasn't a scary point for the family. The point for the family was that he was underwater and they couldn't get his leg out of the machine. And as somebody was holding up his head above the water while he was drowning and trying to keep him up so they could shut the pump off so they could get his leg out. He was tore up pretty good at this time, so I spoke to the lady afterwards, and I realized that at that time, there was no way for the inspector to shut that machine down right away, or shut down that ride, or that amusement ride at that time, that he would have to go back and make up a report. So I felt in myself personally that he should have the power, and that's what this bill does, is gives him the power orally to shut down that ride for the safety of the children and the people using those rides. And I find it very important for that. And also, it looks at the penalties. The penalties for the person, it looks at the penalties for the owners of the amusement park, and also the liability insurance. It was very, very low when I looked at this, and it was down to $100,000. So now this would bring it up to $1 million, and I think that's very important, Mr. Speaker. And I just think that this bill will give the inspector more power. Hopefully, he'll be able to keep our children safe at these amusement parks, and lots of common sense to make sure that when these children and adults use these rides, that they're safe at all times. And I look forward to, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to move this to second reading at this time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to rise in support of the bill and to congratulate the member from Cape Breton Nova for bringing it in. I think it's an excellent bill. Sometimes some of this legislation is necessary, and it's not brought here more by omission than by design sometimes, and we find certain incidents take place that give rise to us considering bills of this type. And I'd also like to congratulate the government and the government House Leader in particular for calling the bill, and to inform the House that our party will be supporting this bill.
Yes. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton Nova to close debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, thank you, my colleague from Timberley Prospect. I'd like to make a move that a motion that we close debate.
Yes. On the question of reading of Bill number 132 for second reading, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary minded? The motion is carried.
Bill 132, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 12 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Amusement Devices and Safety Act.
Order that this bill be referred to law amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. This concludes the business of the House for today. At this time, I would like to recognize the NDP House Leader to set the time, the business, and to adjourn the House for this evening. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The hours tomorrow will be from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., and we will be calling after the orders of the day and daily routine, Bill number 124 and Resolution number 2542. I already presented copies to the House leaders of the other two parties, and I move adjournment of the House for this evening and to reopen tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
The motion is to adjourn. All those in favour? Aye. Business is now concluded.